social cohesion. The social implications of a lack of food and water globally will also impact on world social stability and security. Already demonstrated in the riots that overthrew Mubarak. They weren't about overthrowing him personally, they were about the sudden rise in the price of staples, and of course that situation is now extending right through the Middle East. This is perhaps the most urgent challenge facing humanity in the 21st century. Countries that produce food will now have to produce significantly more of it, and this in a world that will be experiencing the impacts of climate variability and the increasing scarcity of natural resources such as water, soil and fossil fuels, all impacting on food production. So we need some innovative solutions, and Australia, in my view, has those solutions, and we can lead the way, and that's what we've got to do. We've got a few issues in this country, and I'll just go through them. I don't want to emphasise the issues because I think we're really starting to get on top of it. But it's true to say that, particularly in the southern half of the continent, about 60% of our arable land is degraded in some way. Some of it seriously, including through wind and water erosion, acidification, significant loss of soil, organic carbon, structural decline and loss of nutrients. About 1 million kilometres of our streams and rivers are now incised. And of course, the kidneys of any river system, our wetlands, have been too often drained for farming and or urbanisation purposes. So we've got to do something about that. We cannot afford to have our rivers flowing below floodplains and the kidneys of our systems, the wetlands, being filled in. They've got to be rehydrated. And we've got salinity problems in WA. Urban growth in the larger cities are taking up good agricultural land and act as urban hotspots, negatively influencing our climate, especially the small water cycle. And we're getting more erratic and unreliable rainfall, and I think we're seeing that right around the continent. Bigger floods, more extreme temperatures, longer droughts, and consequently more wildfires. Now they're the challenges, and they're in front of us, we can't ignore them, there they are. But what I'm excited about is that in Australia we have the answers. We can reverse land degradation and equip ourselves to better deal with impending challenges. And it is all in how we manage the landscape, the soil. That is the key to the lot, but for which as yet we do not have a simple, clearly postulated aim or light on the hill. Soldiers like to have a clear mission. You've got to get the right hill to attack, because if you attack the wrong one you get killed or you don't knock off the enemy. You've got to get your aim right. And 3/4 of the problem we have in this country, both in a political sense and in other sense, is that people do not spend enough time clearly defining what it is they want to do, how they're going to do it and how they're going to measure the outcome. Now, an aim that I suggest that might be reasonably appropriate for the Australian landscape would be to restore and maintain an Australian landscape that is fit for purpose. That is fit for agriculture, fit for catchment, fit for mining, fit for cities. To restore, bring it up, maintain, keep it at the healthy level. So how do we go about achieving this aim? Let me suggest that healthy soil with a focus on soil carbon is probably the best place to start. The carbon content of soil is one of the key indicators of its health and is a master variable that controls numerous processes. It's the carbon content of soil that largely governs its capacity to absorb, retain and supply moisture within the soil and to sustain active plant growth. I'm told that for every gram of carbon that you've got in the soil, you've got the potential to hold 8 grams of water. For every gram of carbon you lose that capacity to retain water in the soil, which is where you want to retain it. So carbon does all those things, as well as supporting a healthy balance of nutrients, minerals and soil microbial ecologies, improving soil fertility. And it promotes vigorous plant growth and plant-animal resistance to disease and insect infestations. So carbon's very important. We probably find that in Australia it'd be unusual to find actively farmed soils with a carbon content of 1.5% or more, and the State of the Environment report of 2011 says that of the 39 soil types across the country, only 4 have adequate carbon levels. So we've got to do something about that, and I think that can be done. Carbon storage potential is of course determined by soil type as well as the availability of water and other nutrients, and soil carbon levels are inherently low in much of arid inland Australia. But we can build soil carbon, and in doing so build the resilience and boost the productivity of our agricultural soils. I can also talk about acidification, salinity and so on, but you're all aware of that. But let me address a few words now to water, which is where I think we're really on the wrong tram. Water, a major issue of concern at this stage, is the next key issue. Soil and water use efficiency are inextricably linked. You can't look at one without looking at the other because they depend on each other. A primary outcome of a good level of organic carbon is its ability to absorb moisture. And I spoke about the 8 grams of water for 1 gram of carbon. But the big thing that we have in respect to the water issue is this, and if you take the table in front of you as a map of Australia and 100 drops of rainfall on it in a given year, how much do you think actually ends up in the dams, for example? Well, it's 2%, 2 drops. How much ends up in all our rivers and streams? It's 10%, that's 12. How much runs off the roofs? That's another 2, that's 14. And that's exactly what we all look at, isn't it? Measuring how much water in our dams and our rivers and permits and licences from the Murray-Darling, and we ignore the other 86%. 36 of which goes into the soil where it should be, and 50%, half the rainfall on this continent, goes up there because it cannot filtrate the soil. Part of the reason being because you haven't got the carbon content, but for all sorts of other things too, runoff off hills and stream incision and so on. So surely it's time that we looked at how we capture more of the rainfall falling on the landscape and store it where it should be, in the soil where it does its work in the microbial fungal sense, and where it does its work in better preparing us for drought conditions and so on. So that, I think, is key. The third really relates to vegetation. Vegetation, or biodiversity, I guess people call it, is the third critical component. And to me, if you've got to get a philosophy of how best to manage the land, it is really about the integrated management of your soil, your water, the hydrology, and the biodiversity, the plants or whatever it is that you're growing. And you've got to encourage a biodiverse mixture, not monocultures. Monocultures tend to mine the soil, biodiversity tends to enrich the soil. And you've got to keep as much of the landscape green. And I'm not a greenie or a tree hugger, but green, you know what I mean, coloured green with green leaves and all that sort of thing, for as long as possible. Because it's the greenness of your landscape maintained in that way for as long as possible that helps the photosynthetic and the carbon and the water retention and so on. So biodiversity of plants is extremely important. I want to also just briefly mention the example of what plants can do in respect to temperature control and, I guess, adjusting to climates. Again, the table is a big paddock and it's grass. It's grassy rangeland, and the grass, the temperature of the day is 30 degrees. In the middle of it, it's 27 degrees because you're being protected from the direct rays of the sunlight. In the paddock is a big tree with a 10-metre canopy. Under that tree, instead of being 30 degrees, it's about 21 or 22 degrees. It's 5 degrees cooler than the house. Why is that? It's not because of the shade provided by the tree, it's because of the photosynthetic transpiration process, where when the tree is pulling up water, vapour on the leaves, the conversion of the water on the leaves, the vapour, back into the atmosphere, takes up heat and in fact acts as a cooling agent, the equivalent of one tree to about 6 or 7 domestic air conditioners. And then that tree, of course, then pulls down CO2 and does all the U-Butte things. So having your green cover has a big impact on temperature, has a big impact also on the small water cycle, that is the transpiration into the vapour into the atmosphere, and then the dropping of that vapour as rain 50 clicks or 100 clicks down the track. And I'd suggest to you, in Australia we've lost a lot of that small water cycle capacity, and what we're getting is the large water cycle, the big dumps coming in from the oceans, hitting the bare